as we close today, I want to take a look at something that really is, it's talked about quite often. Turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 12. And I'll have you go back and look at it in your own time. You can see the things that are written in a couple of different places. I'm just going to quote from what we get in Romans, because it's one that we're all pretty much familiar with, or I would think. You can go ahead and look at Romans if you'd like, but where we're going to be today is back in the book of 1 Samuel. So, the thought goes like this, and if we get somebody like depending on how you looked at it, I for one was very critical of our last administration and the things that they did. I may very well be quite critical of this administration. It's only a weekend. We'll see. But there were many things that our last president and his administration did that I absolutely could not even begin to agree upon. And then I would see sometimes people would say, well, we may not like it, but God's the one who appoints the leaders, as though there's nothing other than God just picks and chooses who he's putting in, and that's the end of it, for reasons that we don't really fully understand. Now, there is that view. There are also the other view that it's really not as much that God appoints them, but they're the people that, we hear this all the time, they're put in place because of the New World Order, and we really don't have any kind of a vote. We don't have any kind of a voice in the whole thing. And to me, that's almost a little bit on the absurd side, because if that was the case, why would you have our current president, 45, in 2016, replaced with Biden in 2020 and come back to Trump? That's bizarre. That doesn't make any sense, because they're completely working against one another. So how that works out in the minds of the people that are conspiracy theorists, I don't get. I also have a little bit of a tough time wrapping my mind around the idea that God appoints and that's the end of it. So when we read in Romans chapter 13 that we're to be subject to the governing authorities over us because there's really only one ultimate authority, and the ones that are there in the temporal sense are put there by God. Now, again, remember, he's writing to the church there, the Roman church, so it's in the pagan part of the world. It's not as though it's a king in a godly sense. So the appointment of that is really what some people kind of disagree on. Is it that God puts him in because that's what he wants? Or does he allow the person to be put in place because that's what the people have chosen to live under that, and they don't rise up and do anything about it? I personally am more of that opinion, that God holds man responsible for his decisions. And I've used often the example of Solomon, sorry, we're stuck in Proverbs, of King Saul, the very first king that they ever had. And I would refer you back to when, as we see here in Samuel in chapter 8, starting at chapter 8 in Samuel, they were told, you're not going to like the king. Here's all the stuff that he's going to do. And it gives the impression, if you read it, you can read through it where you could go, yeah, they're the ones who demanded a king, but it seems like it's God who picked Saul. And yet we do know that he certainly we know that he really did pick David. And David is the complete contrast to Saul. Really kind of the most obvious way is just them in stature. Because when it was Saul, he looked the part. Head and shoulders above everybody else, he looked the part. David, by the time that Samuel has seen all of the different sons of Jesse, he says to him, well, none of these are the guy. Jesse, don't you have any other sons? Well, yeah, we got the one out there watching the sheep. He's kind of the runt of the litter. You sure you want to see him? And so David's brought in, and that's the man. So we know that as far as his stature, they tried to put Saul's armor on him when he went up against Goliath. And it's like, I can't even move in this stuff. It's huge. So the idea that they're completely different in stature is the most obvious of distinctions between them. But look at how they interacted with God even in their failures, and you can see they're such different men. We know that David is the one who's referred to as the man after God's own heart. Saul was never that man. But it does give the impression, because you would see God sent Samuel, go anoint this. He's going to be the king of Israel. It gives the impression that God's making the decision. But the question would be, is he the decision because the people had decided on that as well? And they had first of all demanded a king, and then Saul is presented to them. But look at what we read here. It's fascinating. Look in 1 Samuel in chapter 12, and then look at verse 12. Now, when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Amorites, came against you, and you said to me, "No, but the king shall, a king will rule over us," when the Lord your God was supposed to be your king. He's being rebuked. It says, "Now therefore, this is the king whom you have chosen, and whom you have desired." Notice he puts those as two separate things. You chose him and you desired a king, first of all, and then you picked that guy. Now you're having to deal with the consequences of it. And you said, "The Lord has set," take note, "the Lord has set a king over you." He has set it in the way of like thinking appointment, what you might see there in Romans. But notice it all begins on a couple of things that took place which God advised them against. He advised against a king, and he advised against Saul because of what the things that he would do. So here, when it comes to a matter of accountability, we find all things present. Is God the one who appoints him? And he puts him in place? Yes. Did he have him anointed? Yes. Would he have done it by his choosing? Absolutely not. Why? He doesn't want them to have a king. Why? They would look to the king to be their governor rather than him. They were to be a theocracy. Yet they wanted to be a monarchy like the other nations around them. God said, "Their rejection is not of you, Samuel. Their rejection is of me," chapter 8 of 1 Samuel. Now here, when they're being held accountable, yeah, they've got a king. God recognizes him as king. God has had him anointed as king. But ultimately here, you wanted him, and this is the man of your choosing. You got him. So when it comes to that question about our presidents that we might have in our own country, which is it? Did God put him in place? Or has God just given us what our will was? And in our case, in this country, we have a voice in this, and the people had spoken in these elections. I'm not one of the conspiracy theorists who think that somehow the New World Order is running the world from some smoke-filled room somewhere in the world. Because if that was the case, they wouldn't have put Trump back in. Why would you want that guy back in place? Look at the things he's doing just in his first week. You could make the case with the previous administration because nobody knew what was going on there. All you could see what was being done, and it was an abomination. So I'm of that opinion that, yeah, God's going to hold you responsible for your decision, but in some places in the world, for sure ours, and for sure it was this way in the Old Testament, the people spoke. And God said, "You've spoken. I'm not going to insist that you do it my way, but you're going to have to deal with the consequences, and good or bad." So just an interesting discussion that comes up. But Saul is a great example. And the selection of Saul starts at 1 Samuel 8. Read it for yourself, and you'll see even the beginning part of his kingship, some things he did really, really well. God wanted to say, "Look, this is not my first choice, but I'd like to bless it if the people will allow it." And we can see how it all worked out. Saul was everything that he said and more, and just not really a good guy. It was followed by David, who was a much different person with all of his faults. He was definitely somebody who was very sensitive to the things of the Lord. So the people still have a voice in these things. Unfortunately, a lot of times from the direction of the king can come some really horrible things if that person is wicked and evil. And we've seen that through the history of mankind. So wanted to address that.